For strength coaches, I think the first thing that we have to cover is understanding the full landscape of the athlete life and the athlete environment, and then obviously in a relative sense relating this to your specific setting. The strategies for this are going to be wildly different if you are in a university setting with good funding, with a full staff, with every resource, tech, and piece of equipment you could ask for, versus if you are a private sector coach who works mostly with youth and high school athletes who you see a couple of times a week and then really don't have much oversight for thereafter. We also need to kind of bear in mind, or I guess reiterate at this point, the difference between prevention and reducing probability. I know that this is, kind of like a pull on semantics, but it is an important philosophical and operational difference in that we don't want to think about it as what more can we do to prevent injury from happening. What we want to think about is acknowledge and understand that it is an inherent part of sport and of training and just life in general that things go wrong and things happen. So I think the problem with this phrasing is that coaches think about prevention as in I need to either do more or just remove something entirely to then absolve this potential risk. That's not the case. Probability suggests that we acknowledge and recognize that inherent risk, but at the same time become more prompted or acutely aware of the strategies that can be put in place to then reduce this likelihood or this probability of something going awry. Now, to be more tangible here, we've talked about our 4 primary pillars of staying in the green. We have the athlete traits, predominantly their injury history and their movement strategies, their state, sleep, stress, readiness, pain, soreness. We have the mechanical component, which for us is looking at the diagnostics from the force plates, looking at a couple of specific measures off of there. And then we have our workload component. Workload is probably the most variable in the sense of it's going to really depend on what you have available to you. If you have GPS units, if you have ability to track and log specific weights and specific times and intensities on field, then workload can be, relatively a pretty easy task for you. But if I go back to that private sector high school coach who works with, 150 athletes and sees them a couple of times throughout the week and then they go off and do whatever else on their own. Like it's virtually impossible to meaningfully track workload in that case. Getting back to the point here, state, trait, workload, mechanical. As a strength coach, if we focus in on that mechanical piece, the best strategic thing that we can do is have a continuous awareness of how the athletes are producing force, where any potential deficits might be, whether that's asymmetries left to right, or it's concentric versus eccentric properties. How are they able to hold and maintain tension at the change of direction? These are all things that not only can become somewhat indicators for injury potential, but they are also very directly actionable for programming. So this reinforces back to this initial point of what can strength coaches do to reduce the likelihood of injury? Well, if we have the opportunity to be somewhat diagnostic or even just observationally aware of how athletes are tolerating forces, then we can specifically cater or modify our training programming to better reflect addressing those deficits. Now for state and trait qualities, we can't ever ignore or just kind of push to the side simple, basic, comprehensive things that put athletes in a better acute state for the training or for the demands of sport for that day. So this covers everything from sleep hygiene to basic nutritional principles, active recovery strategies, balancing work, life, school, sport, training, stressors. Again, that's something that looks a little bit different depending on the setting you work in. But I think our main problem here is that we have tried to kind of divide and conquer all of these things, and we don't ever really bring them back in and look at them in a truly holistic view. To give a recap, for strength coaches, be aware of injury history, how athletes produce movement and forces, what those acute state factors are, their sleep patterns, their stress patterns, their pain patterns, in the best way that you're capable of. Be aware of the workloads throughout the year, high periods, low periods, transitional times. This can also apply to the academic stress schedule as well, or calendar as well. And your job isn't to try to bulletproof any potential injury by doing a bunch of extra things, nor is it trying to completely remove potential by just having them withholding them or having them not participate in things. Your job is to kind of orchestrate this symbiosis between the two, where you have awareness, you put a strategy together, and then you are just constantly fluctuating predominantly volume, intensity, and types of loading, and doing so in a meaningful way that, to the best of your ability, is individualized for the athletes in your setting.